And ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce the first of three punchy conversations on how design might affect our future world. The first is Our Future Selves, and I'd like to welcome Professor Jeremy Myerson, Director of the Royal College of Art's Helen Hamlin Centre, to introduce this panel. It's all about how the design industry can help shape people's aspirations and the way they live their lives in the future. Jeremy.
The Royal College of Art, can you hear me okay? Yeah. Is the world's oldest, longest, continuously running centre for art and design. In fact, this year it's our 175th anniversary. We started life in 1834 as the Government School of Design. And all the way through, we've had a preoccupation with design and people. And it's my great pleasure today to welcome two panelists who are going to join me. First of all, Rita Clifton, who is the chairman of Interbrand. If you'd like to come up, Rita. And Jacqueline Beckingham, director of Benoy. So from brands to entire environments, what these two firms are about are being active in export markets. And what this session is about understanding design for people, understanding design for our future selves, getting closer to customers. And I hope to kind of probe a little bit about what makes British design work internationally. And I think although Interbrand and Benoy are very different and distinctive, working in different areas, what unites their approach, indeed what characterizes much of British design, is a process that puts people at the center of things. I don't know whether you saw yesterday's Observer, but there was a very interesting article by the Chinese artist Ai Weiwei, and he was writing about Danny Boyle's opening ceremony, and he said how upfront and personal it was. You looked directly into the faces of real individuals, and he contrasted this with Beijing, which he said was all about, it was stunning, but it was all about the mass. You didn't get the individuality. And British design, I think, is a lot like that. It interprets the ebb and flow of human emotion, human experience. So I'd like to start with you, Rita. I mean, you've talked a lot about, and you've written and broadcast a lot about the whole customer experience. What is it about British design that gets closer to people?
I think that the most interesting thing, certainly the most valuable thing that we do in the UK, is we absolutely understand the role of design in creating valuable companies. And particularly the role of design in creating brands. And there are a number of roles, as you can imagine. There's the role of design itself in naming, packaging, interiors, retail, and so on. But also there is the design of the branding process itself. Because as we know, the brand is the most important and sustainable asset any organisation has got, and it acts at its best as the organising principle. So how do you brand your process to the customer? How do you answer the phone? How do you serve customers? How do your office environments, how do your shops look? And the reason for saying that, for example, is that if I had £1 or $1 for every organisation I went into and they swore that one of their core values was openness and transparency, and you walk into their offices and it's a nasty dark corridor with people and closed doors leading off it. So everything contributes not only to the way that your own people feel, and therefore they're facing onto the customer, but also clearly in terms of a distinct branded customer experience itself.
If I could bring you in, Jacqueline, you're, I mean, Benoy is well known for Westfield. I think it's Westfield West.
Yes, Westfield West.
And obviously you've done a lot of shopping centres all around the world. And you've often talked about building places that people want to spend more time in. What's your process? How do you get closer to what people want in these kind of places?
I think it's interesting because increasingly people really want more out of these centres. They're not just retail centres, they're mixed-use destinations. and they're places where people live, work, play. It's just not all about the retail environment. So the centers that we're designing right now internationally just have so many more facets to them, and there's so much more to draw upon. And I'm increasingly interested in how they're really becoming great civic spaces for many places that we're designing, and these are the destinations, these are the places where people can leave their homes, leave their work, go and enjoy themselves, and it's about how we create really special destinations for those people.
So it's a kind of third space.
Absolutely,
Yeah,
yes.
I was very struck at breakfast. We were privileged to hear from Richard Rogers, who said he'd spent his whole life studying the effect of physical environment on people and the effect of people on the physical environment. And it kind of recalled Winston Churchill famous quote, you know, we shape our buildings and thereafter they shape us. So how do you try and shape people through the kinds of spaces and buildings you're providing?
I think we really have to give them places that they can engage with, places that will allow people to really enjoy the full range of human activity and emotion that is available. So we're really shaping this space to allow human activity to foster. And I think it's sort of a flexible thing that we're doing, but we're really trying to give them great civic space.
So both Interbrand and Benoy are international. You've got international offices around the world, but London is the hub. London is the heart of the, you know, it's the creative centre of what you're doing. What is it about London as a place to kind of develop a design philosophy?
Well, I mean, half of the people, for example, in our creative department in London are from outside the UK. I mean, you know, Portugal, South Africa, Australia, Switzerland, all over the world. And a lot of them came here as students. Now, then you ask, why do they come here as students? And obviously, you know, about 40% of undergraduates I know at the University of the Arts are from overseas as well. But they come here because of the extraordinary diversity of the creative industries here. And it's interesting, when I was speaking once to the Global Talent Director at an international luxury goods house, she said that actually she came always to London to do talent spotting because we have much more fluid boundaries across the creative industries as she saw it in London versus anywhere in the world. I remember doing some research once around the world on what it was that London was perceived as and why it was such an extraordinary centre. And what's interesting, and maybe is a question mark for, you know, some of the policies that we're developing in this country, is that because London is so open, that leads to more diversity. Diversity means more possibilities, means more creativity, means more enterprise. There's a virtuous circle. If we stop being open, both in terms of open-mindedness, but also critically in terms of welcoming people to London with open hearts and minds, then we'll close down that very important loop.
Absolutely. It's something I can, as the Royal College of Art expands, it's something I can buy into. Jacqueline, from your point of view, are overseas clients coming to London to buy architectural and design services? Is there a London factor there for you?
I think there definitely is, and I think, as Rita said, because London is such an amazing design community, there are so many international countries represented here in the community itself. I think it gives a certain vibrancy to the design professions, and I think that our clients are especially interested in understanding what's happening all over the world, and they know by coming to us they can really start to understand that. And I think critically, London and the UK itself is inspirational in terms of being a groundbreaker in new forms of design, and I think that's really something a lot of our clients are looking for.
Okay, so let me switch now to kind of our future selves and the kinds of changes that you, in a sense, you've got a creative radar out there. In my own research centre at the Royal College of Art, we're very, very interested in ageing population, for example, and the fact that there are now, in this country, there are more pensioners than there are teenagers, but apparently that's nothing compared to Japan, where 1 in 4 are now over 65. In fact, I have a friend in the Building Research Institute in Tokyo who says if you throw a stone in Japan, it'll hit a senior. And Demographic change is absolutely critical to the way that people respond to brands and use buildings. Is aging population a big issue for you, and what other demographic issues are arising?
Well, certainly it's a big issue as far as the future of brands are concerned, because if one looks ahead to the next 25 years and where the world's most valuable brands, the best design brands, are going to come from, health and well-being and new lives for the new old is going to be a critically important market. And at the moment, apart from the big healthcare companies, there aren't great brands in health and well-being. So I think that's a really interesting issue. But at the other end of the spectrum, because obviously there's a big north-south split between demographic changes. And just recently we were doing some work in India, for example, with a company called Godrej. I don't know if anyone has heard of it. It was like Unilever on speed. I mean, it makes, components for rockets as well as hair dye and just about everything in between. What was interesting there is that, obviously, the population of India, half the population of India is under the age of 25, and that goes for many of the employees in the company as well. And the zeitgeist of India is obviously about coming out as a new global superpower, and there's extraordinary aspiration, there's extraordinary vitality, and that needed to be reflected in what their brand was about and how the brand was designed to reflect a brighter future and also brighter living. So there's a lot one can tap into, clearly, with some demographic changes, but the only other thing I'd add is that so many of the world's most valuable brands cut across demographic age. I mean, we just heard from one of the most extraordinary exponents of that just now. If you think about Google and Amazon, these aren't brands that fit into niches. They're just brands that connect with people, and they connect with people across a very broad global community. And that is going to be the trick, simplifying people's lives, whatever age, whatever background, and helping them through.
Well, just to add to that, I think that one of the interesting splits, perhaps that's happening right now, is the population that has access to travel and technology and really has a really global understanding of what's happening in the world. And they have such high aspirations because they see good design everywhere. And so when they want something in their hometown, they want it to be world class. And so many of our clients are asking us for groundbreaking, iconic projects for their hometowns. And I think that's the challenge for us, is to come up with creative ideas that are non-contextual, but work in these very different geographic locations. So it's kind of global, local. I think so.
Yeah. I mean, Interbrand do this annual kind of survey of the world's top brands. I noticed, I haven't seen 2012, but 2011, I think number 1 was Coke, number 2 was IBM, and Apple was in at number 8. And you could have had Coke and IBM 40 years ago. What is it about brand recognition that takes so long for things to come through?
Well, of course, the boring answer to that is it depends. And it's true that half of the top 50 brands in the world have been there for 50 years or more. And it's also true that many brands that we were getting very overexcited about a few years ago have sort of gone up like a firework and gone back down. And so therefore...
Like which?
Well, for example, Yahoo. I don't know if anyone's here from Yahoo, but, and also Palm. Palm, what happened to Palm? And yet, actually, there was, we all had it in our hands not so long ago. So the pressure for the lighter brands, the new paradigm global brands like the Googles and the Amazons and everything else, their pressure is going to be to stay up there long term, because if you're a lighter brand, i.e. you don't have heavy manufacturing, you don't go around and create factories and distribution networks and everything else, is that if you're light to go up, then you might well be light and fast to go down as well. So how do you keep on connecting people? How do you keep on fascinating them, charming them, not arming them, and all those other questions that we need to keep on challenging ourselves with?
Which brands do you think are bubbling under? Which ones do you think are going to come shooting through in the next few years? Maybe things we've not even heard about.
Yes, I mean, we should remember that 15 years ago or so we hadn't heard of Google, and 5 years ago then who was tweeting. So I wouldn't really like to forecast that, but obviously there are a number of brands that are bubbling under. I mean, a few years ago when we were tipping Burberry, to be one of those brands. And how amazing that Burberry has done what it's done. I mean, talk about using the brand as an organising idea, and everything that that company is now doing to stitch the brand into everything they do, not only inside but also outside, and to invest in things like Burberry Acoustic that actually makes people think certain things about the Burberry brand. And how ironic in some ways it took an American chief executive to recognise the value of British attitude and using that around the world.
Interesting. And Jacqueline, just on the shopping centre front, which countries do you think are kind of getting it right? I know you worked in Hong Kong on the Elements scheme, which really looks like the interior of a hotel rather than a shopping centre.
Yeah, and I think that's a trend we saw 5 years ago, where a lot of interiors for retail centres started to take on the really positive attributes of hospitality. But I think places that are getting it right are countries like Singapore, which has amazing shopping facilities, in Hong Kong, and even Thailand. So in Asia, there are some really great examples, but then surprisingly in Latin America, countries like Brazil and Chile have world-class facilities that would equal any retail environments you'd see anywhere in the world. I think it's interesting because I think the whole there's a very level playing field across many countries right now, and the exciting projects are happening in very unexpected locations.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed. Time for a couple of very, very quick questions. Would anybody like to ask anything of Rita and Jacqueline? Anybody want to? A couple of quick questions. Going. If you don't want to ask the first question, you can ask the second question first. Yeah?
Digital, maybe.
Digital. You're going to ask yourself a question.
I was just helping.
You're going to ask yourself a question. Is digital going to change brands?
That's a really, really good question. Thank you very much, Jeremy.
And it just popped into my head.
Funny you should say that. Because what's really interesting, I think, about digital, and it's easy to get overexcited about all this stuff, but I do think we need to remember that human beings are unlikely to be able to stay awake for much longer than they do at the moment. And by the time you pick up all the tweeting and the blogging and everything else and all the other rubbish sometimes it's written on endless sites, then you do have to think about how brands are going to cut through with simplicity and clarity. I think we heard a lot about that in the last section. But one of the great things about the digital age is that there's no excuse now for not being who you say you are and doing what you say you're going to do. And I think this is only good not only for the businesses themselves, but also more broadly.
Okay, well, on that note, can I say thank you very much indeed to Rita and Jacqueline. Apologies from Richard Seymour, who is unwell today. But we got to hear from two real active exporters of design consulting services. So thank you very much indeed. And back to David.